Hey, everybody. Well, let's get started. So you can kind of cheat and look on the left panel and see what our next slides are going to be about. But this first slide is basically the basic formula that we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to go into a little bit about branding and artwork and the program title for your show, and then dive in a little bit into the optimizing your podcast feed, and then tying that in with your podcast website, and then using everything above that we talk about to help with your podcast promotion. So if you're ready, we'll move forward.
Yeah. I'm ready to talk about podcast branding. Okay, so for the first thing is as simple as it gets, is your program title. Do your research and see if what you want to title your podcast has already been taken or if something very similar has been. Because once people start looking for your show in iTunes or any other directory, you want them to be able to find yours instead of someone else's. And I'm pretty sure, Angelo backed me up on this, that iTunes will not be able to search for your keywords. It's going to be able to search based on your title and your author tags.
Right. So as far as search and discovery is concerned on iTunes and most of the podcast directories that are out there, they only use the title of your show and the title of each episode.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you're going to do a show on baseball, you don't want to just put a clever name in your title. You also want to include the word baseball, or else the obvious will happen. Someone will search baseball and never find your show.
Right.
So, and it's kind of hard to remind people, but web SEO is very intelligent now. It can find the words that are related, but iTunes search is not that sophisticated, and actually that's quite okay because, and this is the great thing about podcasting, is you're only competing with about 300,000 other shows, not even 100,000 that are active in the past couple months. So the need for having real crazy search options is not there for iTunes. Where, in the web, you're making a website, you're competing with billions, if not trillions of websites. So
good to know for your program titles. As far as your artwork, we'll get into that in a minute here, but you want it to stand out against others and be legible, and people are going to be able to see what your images are clearly, no matter the size. Like, I'm looking at the International Podcast Day artwork in the corner of the screen right now, and it looks good because I can still read everything on it, even though it's small and tiny and in the corner. And then
for your add.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to add a good rule of thumb is that the image needs to be at least 1400 by 1400. But what does it look like at 90 by 90? That same image.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of folks will make images that are real intense and real detailed, and unfortunately, and many of the views on the phones and tablets, they're not legible. So
right, and when most podcasts are consumed on mobile devices nowadays, then that's something you definitely need to consider. Okay, so going into the color scheme, going back to what Angelo said, if you're going to have a podcast about the Cincinnati Reds, you want to have your branding on your website and your artwork and everything go with the Reds. Go with red and white. Don't add in some orange or some brown. Don't, stay with what makes sense for your show. And then the website design should follow your artwork and your title, and it should all flow together. It doesn't have to be matchy, but it should be a cohesive unit of design. People need to be able to associate your website with your podcast. So this is where we get some details about artwork. These are the requirements from iTunes, and any other directory that you're going to submit to are also going to have the same requirements, because most likely directories are going to pull from iTunes directory. So they recommend that you keep the file size below 500K, anywhere from 1400 by 1400 to 3000 by 3000. And iTunes recommends the higher the better. If it's not square, not going to accept it whatsoever. And they prefer a JPEG over a PNG, because the more color and detail and intricate your artwork gets, the higher the file size is, and that happens especially with PNG. So we recommend just going with a JPEG for that. So all things to consider with your artwork.
All right. Well, let's dive in now to podcast RSS feeds. And actually, before we go any further, are there questions in the chat room? Let me see. And actually, if someone can moderate that for us and let us know, that'd be great.
I'm not looking at it at all.
Yeah.
But for the artwork, we also just put out a blog post on powerpresspodcast.com with those specific details about artwork. So if you didn't catch everything, go check out that article and you'll be just fine.
Right. Now, I did see a question that Daniel Lewis already answered, but
thanks, Daniel.
Yeah, I can kind of elaborate a little bit on that on program titles. It's very important that you do not violate copyright law and trademark law. And it's a little trickier, especially since iTunes works internationally. But for podcasts in the US, the main thing is to make sure you're not using like a company name for your title. A good example would be calling your podcast like the Disney such and such podcast. That will get you in trouble.
Right.
So we saw, especially with baseball and football teams a couple of years ago, a block of shows get removed because they were using those sports team names and even slogans. Like I'm drawing a blank of the Cincinnati. The slogan that Cincinnati uses, but there was a podcast that used that same slogan and they got in trouble. So just watch those trademarks and copyrights.
They'll get you in trouble.
So
that's for sure.
Right. So the RSS feed, there's a lot of opportunity we see with a lot of podcasts that are missed on maximizing your podcast RSS feed for podcasting. For example, we just kind of touched on the title being important for each program. The title can be maximized for episodes as well. And we added features to our PowerPress plugin for WordPress to let you create essentially a separate title for every episode than what you use for the web page. And what this means is that you can then target your titles for the episodes differently than how you target your titles for the web pages for SEO. This has lots of advantages. Probably the biggest would be that now you can put an episode number, for example, that appears in iTunes, but it doesn't appear on your web page if you're concerned about the number interfering with SEO. It also lets you hone in on keywords. I don't want to say keyword stuffing, but you can add, like the word, if you're talking about baseball, include baseball in the title, because that's what's indexed in search and iTunes SEO. But you might not be including that in your web page because it would stuff keywords in your web page.
Won't stuffing iTunes that way get you in trouble, possibly?
Well, it depends. If the content is not relevant, then yes. Another thing is the author tag. What I recommend with the author tag is that if you have a co-host, you make sure that your co-host name are in each episode. And then if you interview someone, for example, and this is a murky line, I've been told, but if you're going to interview someone and it's for the whole hour and your show is an hour long, put their name in the author tag, especially if you're not putting it in the title tag. But obviously, if you put it in a title tag that you're interviewing so-and-so, then it doesn't need to be in the author tag in the first place. But it's completely okay. Now, what is probably wrong is if you just mention somebody in your show and then you're throwing their names in the author tag. iTunes has blocked shows from showing up in search because they've stuffed keywords in these fields. So be smart about it. Make sure when you put keywords and phrases in your titles and author tags that it is relevant. So
okay, quick question.
Yeah.
How do you do this in PowerPress? The title and the episode title.
Yeah. Well, there's two ways. The way I'll recommend real quick is pretty simple, is to go into PowerPress settings, and then on the left submenu navigation, there's a podcasting SEO menu option. Just go ahead and check that or select that menu. And then on this page where you can customize SEO options, enable the first option that's there, which is to set a program or episode title per episode.
Okay.
And then near the bottom on this, also check the last checkbox option, which allows you to highlight podcast episode specific tags and attributes that help with search on iTunes. And this will include the author tag, the program or the episode title tag, as well as the subtitle. Now, I'll expand on that here in a second, but the subtitle is not indexed for search on iTunes, but it is like a subheading, as you will, like you would find in a newspaper heading. So when someone's on a phone, for example, and they search for your podcast and they find one of your episodes, they will see that subtitle, at least the first 5 or 6 words. So that's an opportunity to grab their attention and get them to consume your content rather than one of the other search results that appears in whatever they're searching for. So that's a good segue into the other iTunes tags. The other iTunes tags that are available include such things like the image, iTunes image on a per episode basis. That again is another opportunity to capture someone's attention on every episode. Although I have a recommendation not to create a specific episode or specific image per episode, in that it kind of dilutes your own brand, especially if the images don't look anything like the others. It'll actually look like completely different episodes from completely different shows. And there's some other tags too. I'm looking in the chat room to see.
Honestly, the effort of making a new album artwork for each episode seems like too much.
Right. And especially for the fact that for the iTunes image tag, it's only used by iTunes iOS apps when someone actually is listening. And we know from our studies that we've done for podcasts that include chapter information that no one really pays attention to that. So people are not playing your content and then looking at your logo for 45 minutes, unfortunately. In most cases, the use case is that they're jogging, they're running, or they're doing something else while they're listening to your content that stops them from being able to look at whatever content you also packaged with your audio. So if you still want to do it, it's an option, and it is a cool option, but your traction will vary. Now, to just wrap all this together, these options basically free you up to consider your web SEO as something separate from your podcast. But because you're doing everything in your RSS feeds from your own website, all the web links and traction that you get link back right to your website, which does help with your SEO. So are you ready to kind of, what's that?
And everyone's looking for SEO, always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we're ready for the next slide.
Which is promotion in podcast directories. Everyone knows that iTunes is kind of the big one. It's the one that you submit your podcast to, and that's the first one that you do, and is honestly the most important one. But there are also some other ones that we suggest that you submit your podcast to, which is Google Play, launched, spring of 2016, about 6 months ago. And for Android users, depending on how they want to, listen to their podcast, or anyone that's just in the Google Play, options already, this might be a way for them to find a podcast. So they could stumble across yours in Google Play podcast. Stitcher is one that we tell people to submit to. TuneIn and ours, Blubrry.com. We have, I don't even know how many podcasts that we're up to every day, but it's over 325,000 podcasts right now. And by using ours, it just allows you to be involved in subscribe by email, MyCast, subscribe on Android, and just be found on our website as well. So between all of these directories, you're getting a pretty good spread of being able to be found. And then after that, if you want, you can search for some niche directories. We have the example of techpodcast.com, because for someone such as Todd, our CEO here, who does shows about new technology, that's a perfect place for him to have his show. Research other podcasts that are similar to yours and see if there's anything like that. See if you can get involved in a small directory of things that are specific to the audience that you want to get, because there are, I guess, some ways to stand out in these directories, but it's also very easy to get lost in them. And whatever you can do to stand out is just going to be for the better of your show. So we recommend iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, ours, Blubrry.com directory, and anything that is specific to your show that you think would be helpful. So next up is your podcast website. Just super important.
Yeah. So one of the sayings that our CEO, Todd Cochran, which he's going to be speaking later today. Do you know what time?
I think it's 11 Pacific, so like pretty late on the East Coast.
Yeah. So catch out his session. I think he's talking about what all the numbers mean.
His session is audience engagement and metrics that matter.
Right. So he has a saying that he doesn't care how his podcast gets on different places, except that it's on all glass. Mm-hmm. And what he meant by that is that it's on every screen that you can imagine. So, and we should probably mention podcasts that are listed on Blubrry. We have apps that specifically target TV-based screens, simply because our CEO wants his podcast there
on every screen possible.
Right. So, but what we mean by making your website viewable on all glass, all screens, is that it is friendly. It views well on all screens, meaning that when you view it on a full screen, or you view it on a phone or a tablet, all the content that's on that page is still available.
And it's easy to find in the same places. You don't have to go searching for things. You don't have to, hopefully you don't have to hit, make this the desktop version or make this the mobile version. So it's critical to have it be recognizable on whatever device you're on.
Right, exactly. And then the next thing you want to make sure, and I can go a little bit more into the website part of it, but that your website includes a web-friendly player. And what we mean by that is that the player can play the content no matter what kind of device it is that comes to the website. Today, that's not as big of a challenge as it was even a couple of years ago. But for the most part, as long as you use a web-friendly player that is using HTML5 for playback, you're pretty much all set. Then social links, this is where we're starting to take your website and tie it in with promotion. Allows you to tie in Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and other social sites that you like or are part of your strategy for your podcast. So then your listeners that are diehard that come to your website can easily share your content on those social sites. Probably the most popular would be to have a link to your latest episode so someone can send that to their Facebook page, and that'll include a link that then links back to your website to that specific episode, kind of completing the circuit as far as promoting, tying your podcast website to your social strategy. Web SEO, I'm not going to get into the details on that, but your podcast website also can take advantage of web SEO to help people that are searching for content like yours on, say, Google or Bing to your website. And then once those web visitors come to your website, it's your advantage to that point, then convert them to a subscriber to your podcast. And that's a good lead in then to our subscribe tools. Right, ready for the next slide, I think. Yeah. So if you're using our podcasting plugin, PowerPress, these options are available to you with only a couple clicks. But if you're not using our plugin, it would benefit you to create your own page on your website that explains to users how to subscribe to your podcast. We did a study 2 years ago to look at all the podcasts that we had indexed in our Blubrry directory to see how many podcasters were doing this, creating a page and help try to convert their listeners to subscribers. And we found that only 1 out of 50 actually did anything beyond just providing a link to iTunes. And then even less than that went any further than explaining what to do. We did see that there were a lot of podcasts that would just link to iTunes, but even then it wasn't obvious in most cases that this was to subscribe to the podcast. Some cases it kind of looked like you were clicking a button to find an app on iTunes or something else on iTunes. So that motivated us to then put everything together as far as subscribe tools and resources into an actual obvious place for your website to then display all the subscribe options, not just iTunes, but for all the different apps available in one central place. So our subscribe tools that we provide automatically includes iTunes and an Android service that Blubrry supports free. Blubrry also provides a simple email notification service, and not to confuse that with a newsletter. It is not a newsletter. It's not intended to be for only your podcast. It's only meant for a listener to then subscribe to as many podcast programs as they like and receive a daily digest that there's new episodes. But this is a really useful tool in that it allows someone who maybe doesn't have an iPhone or Android app or Android device to easily subscribe to a podcast without having to do any other effort. We also provide a simple copy and paste box for the RSS feed. That's for nerds like myself that want to easily copy the feed URL and paste it into my special app.
I'm not going to do that.
Yeah,
I use subscribe by email.
Right. And then we also list all the niche podcast directories, such as Stitcher, which we briefly talked about, that we recommend submitting to, including Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, and I think there's one more. It's just off the top of my head, but
that's all I can remember.
Yeah. And the great thing about the subscribe tool page that we help podcasters generate is that it is just a page in your WordPress site. Obviously, when we set it up, it has a template, so it has some text in there right away. But it would benefit you then to go back and edit that and either change or rewrite it in your own words to fit your audience. So if your audience is tech savvy, you might want to remove half the language or provide additional resources. Or if your audience is not heavily tech, you might want to add more options to that or more explanation to how to subscribe. So this is just a template to get you going with the right tools and buttons, and you can edit it and implement it the way you like. So I think we're ready for the next slide.
Yeah. So the rest of the promotion comes after you've done, everything for your website, because once you have your website and your artwork and your title and all of that has been done, now you just need to actually promote what you have created. So the first thing to do is tell your friends and family. And this is one of the most important ones, because they can be your biggest, word of mouth people at the beginning, and your biggest critics sometimes. So they are able to help you critique what you could be doing better. So, and they typically will have some of the same interests that you do, so they can give you feedback on that. And even if they don't, they'll still be willing to share this for you. And then after that is get others talking. So if there is a show or a blog or a Twitter feed or a Facebook group or whatever it is that would be interested in the content that you're creating and the show that you want to get out there for people, get in contact with them. Tell them that there's this new show. Tell them that, you have this website and you're sharing information that you think would interest them, and it grows from there.
Right. Well, yeah, let me elaborate on that too. With getting others talking, there's a real opportunity to, reach out to like your local NPR or radio stations, even a university TV or radio station, or even like blogs that are similar to the content you're starting to cover. If you can get these folks to say, "Hey, I just listened to this podcast, and this is what I learned from it," that's like your best way of driving new traffic to your podcast website and to your podcast, is by getting others to start talking about it.
That's one of the biggest ways. So social media optimization is decide what pages you want to create. If you want to have a Twitter account for your show, if you want to have a Facebook account, if it's Google Plus, if it's some obscure website that the people that you want to reach are going to be on, make that page update with your new episodes and articles that you put on your website, or tips, whatever it is. If you're trying to sell products on your show, whatever it is that you want to share with people, share it consistently on your social media, because it's also easy to forget about new shows if it's not, if you're not being reminded of it somehow. If there's no way to keep track of this, it's easy to forget to check out that website that you found that one time. So social media can also lead to, finding other shows that are similar to yours. So it is a type of community and will help you immensely. And if you don't have one of these accounts for a show that you already have, get one and decide how you want to manage it, and get one as soon as possible.
Yeah. And, we might want to just talk about the importance of the social, connecting your podcast to social. Probably the most important would be Facebook as far as the destination, and then Twitter. But this could vary based on what your show's about, right? So if you're doing something on photography, then, Instagram and Snapchat, and what are the others? There's tons of photography, and Pinterest. There's a lot of stuff that all of a sudden opens you up to, hey, I need to be connected to this and this and this.
I was just listening to John Lee Dumas and Gary before we were on, and I was listening to John talk about how he goes through an entire morning process of something about an email and Snapchat, and then Twitter and then Facebook or something like that. And he put it all together because he knows that not everyone's going to be checking each type of those things. So it's important to hit all of those. And that goes into your community of podcasters. So join something that is of similar interest to your show or to whatever it is that you are selling on this website. So it's important to be a part of this community. That's what podcasting is about. That's what International Podcast Day is about, is joining a community. So, and you'll find similar podcasters that way as well. So that's kind of, a way to find your own mini network of people. And that's also going to happen with your specific websites and forums that you'll find as well. It's
right.
It all comes together.
Right. And, connecting with similar podcasters is so critical. And I've been doing the different podcast conferences, and I hear a lot of podcasters say, it doesn't seem right to talk with another podcast that does the same thing I do. Aren't they a competitor? But that's actually not how a lot of listeners when they consume content think. Like they're not picking one podcast about knitting, for example. They're going to do them all. So it's to your advantage to have a relationship, if not cross promote with other podcasts that are related to yours. And actually, so I see Daniel Lewis is in the chat room, but I know Daniel Lewis does a great job with this. He networks and he cross promotes with a couple of other podcast consultants. I'm trying to remember all of them. I'm having it's been a long day.
You mean Cliff already. And Dave and John?
Yeah, Dave and John. Yeah. Oh yeah, Ray.
Yep.
And then what's Daniel? I guess this is your opportunity to advertise the podcaster roundtable as well. But so they get together it's almost once a month. Seems like a little more than once a month about the podcaster roundtable. So you imagine if you're doing shows on knitting and there's 3 other podcasts that do the same thing, and you got together and did a knitting roundtable, it's only going to strengthen all the shows, not just yours.
Right. It's positive influence for everything. So I think
there. So, and Daniel just put the link in the chat room.
I think we're ready for the next slide. There we go.
It's still moving. We did skip the websites and forums. So, it might seem obvious, but sometimes folks need to be reminded that, if your show talks about topics where there's communities of old school forums or even a blog post somewhere on someone's obscure website, but there's lots of comments that are still active. People keep leaving comments there. Those are places that it's an opportunity for you to leave a reply and mention what you're doing or mention an episode that relates to what they're talking about in that particular thread. So that sometimes that's a missed opportunity, and you have to kind of remember that those are opportunities there.
Mm-hmm.
So
going into YouTube, this one is kind of a no-brainer if you have a video podcast. For example, Todd does a video podcast, I think once a week or twice a week. But he does it live first on YouTube. He does a live stream first on YouTube and then turns it into a podcast. And that's one of the easiest ways to do that if you're going to go the video route. And even if you don't do video, it's super simple to, take your album artwork and put it with your audio file and upload that to YouTube. And it might not be the most convenient way to listen to a podcast, but it is another outlet for people to find you that way.
Right. Now, do keep in mind that they've done studies on audio-based podcasts on YouTube and found that I think and Daniel Lewis will have the exact number here in the chat room in a second, that I think it's about 2 minutes is the average time that someone will stay listening and then they tune out.
Right.
So
maybe
if you can create a video version of your podcast and use that, that'd be great. But here's where it's a YouTube and specifically really helps is that if you put a YouTube embed on your site and then YouTube then links back to or then you also have that video on YouTube, it can actually help with a little bit with SEO. Not much, but it can make a little bit of a difference.
Yeah. So
did he 90 seconds?
90 seconds. That's not good.
That's less than 2 minutes.
That's not good. So good place to possibly be found, but don't rely on people to actually listen to your show on YouTube.
Yeah. And, so Daniel, I have another one to throw into that study is now go back and find out how long the intros are for these shows because some intros are a minute and a half.
Yeah. Yeah, but 90 seconds in, someone's got their intro and a pre-roll advertisement. Don't even get to the show.
Right. Or they're still playing half the song that they want as their intro.
Yeah. So, okay. The next on business cards is to me is a no-brainer. Even if you don't think that people are using business cards as frequently anymore in the world that we live in, go to a conference and you will still see business cards all day being swapped by people. And it's just have a business card for yourself and for your show, or even just for your show, because it's a good way for people to remember you and keep track of it.
Oh, definitely. And I would also go further and recommend that you make sure you use paper or cardstock that you can actually write on the back. So it's amazing how often I'll be at a show and I'll flip the card over and write something before I hand it to somebody.
Yeah.
I've found that just doing that, someone will look at it 3 days and later and say, "Oh, wait a minute, there's something written on here. It's more important than just a card."
Mm-hmm.
So,
yep.
Or that's just part of the working with individuals in person rather than virtually, and making and leaving that connection with them.
That's why conferences and events and meetups and whatever it is that you're attending are so important. It doesn't matter if you're attending a podcast conference or if it's a conference about, whatever it is that your show is about. If you're at a comedy film festival and that's what your podcast is about, then tell people, give out that business card, network with everyone there, and tell them if they're interested enough to be at that conference, they're willing to listen to a podcast as well. So you never know who you're going to meet and who will start to be part of the word of mouth. So.
Oh yeah, and I'm reading the chat room here, and let's say JD mentioned that the bookmark, the creative. How do you say? Yeah, how creative your bookmark or your I keep referring to it as a bookmark.
Your business cards.
That's what he did. But how creative your business card is can make the difference of recognition of what you're doing. So I remember a few years ago, one podcaster used the microphone shape in his business card and handed it out, and then you could actually fold it and put the two ends together, and it was like a stand-up microphone.
Wow.
I mean, you don't forget that stuff.
No.
And same with a bookmark. I mean, if you immediately start utilizing what you give somebody, it's just going to have them keep it.
Mm-hmm.
It's swag works the same way. So we're not necessarily recommending swag for podcasts, although if you can afford it, not business cards and swag, if you can make those foamy stress balls that you can squeeze, things like that.
People love to win free things and get them in the mail.
Exactly. Yeah.
So tap your audience. What do you want to say about that?
So yeah, well, we covered the conferences, events, and meetups. Yeah, we did. That goes hand in hand with the business cards. But tapping your audience, your first 5 or 6 episodes, you'll immediately have a couple hundred fans that are just diehard fans. So they can be your biggest advocates. So obviously you don't want to overburden your listeners, but it's not actually bad or rude to say, ask your audience like, hey, do you mind telling some of your buddies and friends or colleagues about the show? We'd really appreciate it. You have the right approach, and you will get that extra mile from the folks that really like your show.
That genuine asking, though, is the important part.
Right. And actually, in most cases, you just need to kind of remind them that that it's okay to mention my show, and then they'll gladly do it. So tap your audience. They're a resource. They can help your audience grow further.
Right.
So, and I think you were kind of leading to it too, but you can even do things where you engage your audience, get them on your show. Imagine if you're listening to a show and then one day they interviewed you and they used what you said for 2 minutes in the show. You'd probably instantly be a fan for life at that point.
Actually, I said on the PowerPress podcast at some point, if someone wants to be on the show, let me know, email me, and that's been one of our guests. So it does work that way. If it's easy to engage with people that way. They enjoy it.
Yeah. Plus it helps your content.
Mm-hmm. That always does. And then last but not least is a mailing list and a newsletter. This also is, kind of old school, like business cards, but super important. Getting people to join your mailing list or your newsletter or whatever it is that you have keeps them coming to your website. Whatever you put in that newsletter has to intrigue them enough to bring them back to your website, because they might be, just subscribe to your show and don't really engage with what you have available online, whether that's your website or your services or your products or even just your social media. But this can be a way to bring them back in.
Yeah. And this is old school new technology, I guess you could almost say, because it still uses email.
Yeah.
But it's not as old as a business card. But still, set up a newsletter. It'll help give you traction over time.
Mm-hmm.
But as we put in the big letters at the bottom,
don't spam people. That's the easiest way to get rid of your audience. And our graphic designer here at Blubrry is the first one to say it. If he gets more than 3 emails from like a company or an organization or whatever the heck it is in 1 week, he automatically unsubscribes and it's done. And I think once a week is a lot for some people. So keep your audience in mind of when you're sending things out to them, when you are asking them, how often you are asking them to engage. They appreciate being involved in your podcast, but they don't want to be treated like a customer per se. So there's a fine line of annoying your audience and being engaged with your audience. And it's figure out what it is.
Right. Well, great. I think we covered everything, but I think now I want to open it up for more questions.
Well, Will Sinclair, podcaster, you are correct. Spamming is also illegal. So that's not a good start. That's not a good way to start something with your audience.
Yeah. But there is a way you can send email to people on a regular basis and it not come off spammy.
Yeah.
it's half of it's the approach. The other half is, intent. I mean, there are people out there that intentionally send out stuff in order to make money or harvest emails, something like that. That's where you really get into that, breaking the law.
You have to be providing actual value in whatever it is that you're sending, or otherwise, just what's the point of doing it?
Right. Yeah.
Then it really turns into spam.
So, and I guess we should also just add to the whole newsletter thing. Make sure you use a newsletter platform that follows the Can-Spam Act laws, so you're not getting in any kind of legal trouble. Yep. So let's see. Do we have any questions in the chat room, or?
Doesn't look like it, but.
Well, we've made it through, Mackenzie, without the power going out.
I know. I've been that's kind of been in the back of my head, especially since the thunder started up again.
Yeah. So. And I see like emergency equipment across the street.
Yeah.
Behind you. Yeah. So.
But it's been going.
Oh well.
It went well for with that. So. Hello, Steve.
Well, hello, Blubrry. How are you?
We're good. We didn't lose you to,
awesome.
A zombie.
No, that happens a little later. Go back and watch my opening, and you'll see some of the chaos that went on, and you will have a good laugh because it'll probably go viral after what I did. So,
good.
That's the way it is. Live is live, right?
Uh-huh.
So,
yes, it is.
We really appreciate what Blubrry brings to the table in terms of products, services, and also companionship, advice, recommendations, the great support staff, the forums you have, the PowerPress plugin that most of us use. It's really a pivotal center point of what a lot of us use and breathe with. And if not for folks like you, and of course your amazing CEO, Todd, we wouldn't have these capabilities, and we would be like we were back in the early 2000s again, all scratching our rears trying to figure out how to do this, right? And, Angelo, as the creator of, PowerPress, I mean, what an amazing feat, to be honest with you, that you have achieved with the amazing plugin. And, I can't say enough major prompts to you for the creation of these tools and the entire team at Blubrry and what you do for the podcasting space.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks. You.
So, and we forgot to mention, because I'm always thinking tech rather than the business, but we are running a special promo where you get 3 months rather than just the normal one, specifically for this event. So it's the promo code is Blubrry with no E's and then 3M. For 3 months. So that works with both the hosting and pro stats.
But you have to get that before midnight Pacific time tonight.
Oh. Are we still on the air?
Yeah, but neither of us can seem to hear Steve.
You know why? Because I can't tell the different colors of all these stinking buttons over here. And
too many.
My wife says, keep that mute all the ways on. So that's what I do.
Yeah.
But
that's the beauty of life.
Yeah, it's a whole nother topic for probably a different kind of day. However, I appreciate both of you being on International Podcast Day of 2016. And thank you so much for the platinum sponsorship of the event. We look forward to seeing more this afternoon with Todd, or actually this evening. And of course, he'll be with me on my closing this evening. So once again, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. And good luck for the rest of the day today.
Thank you. Dave just got out of bed, so it's time for my nap.
Oh, yeah.
Good.
Yeah, and seriously, thank you very much for putting this on. This is the 4th year. So we totally understand how much effort goes into these things and time, and I mean, you had to do months of planning, so we greatly appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's our pleasure. It's our little way of giving back to the community, and we appreciate it. So
That's a lot of fun.
Great.
Well, folks, coming up, we're going to have Hanny Mora from Simple Podcast Press. Hanny is a master at automation, and he's actually going to provide some unique things live. So we'll see how that goes. So stick with us, folks, and we will be right back after this next intermission.